Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Truth. I'm your host, one you love the most, Niall Hassan, back with a brand new episode here on The Truth. Back once again with my boy AJ Ponciano. AJ, how are you doing here today?
I'm doing great now. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm loving this new headphone look you got rolling there. Back to like the 2010 days with the cord on the earbuds. Where'd
Hey,
that come
hey,
about?
this is your fault. You didn't want to hear your own echo. We could have gone this normal, but you had
Can you
to.
blame me?
A little bit. I've had to deal with your echo before. It's all right.
Well, I didn't know that you have ever dealt with my echo. You could have said something and I would have felt like a little bit better, but whatever. I
No,
guess snooze you lose, right?
no, I sucked it up like a man. I took it off the chin. I did what we had to do to
It,
get podcast done.
And honestly, too, I really don't know if it's like a big deal, but like I'm more concerned about the fact that it would come out weird on the pod if like the echo, if it was like, if I had to just listen to my echo and like it didn't affect the pod, then I don't think I would really have minded. I'm more looking out for the fans and the viewers to not have to worry about hearing two of me, even though everything I usually say is right and you want to hear double. I didn't know for sure, but yeah, so anyways, we are back today. We had tried to get AJ's AirPods to connect. They unfortunately did not connect. So AJ is rocking that retro look here today. Got a great time. It is Wednesday night. I'm sorry for getting the takeaway show out at least a little bit later than usual. We've obviously had busy weeks. And AJ keeps falling asleep when he's doing his homework and just doing a bunch of homework. I got a bunch of homework as well. So we're lucky enough to really get the podcast out there. On top of that, I currently got the Royals Yankees game playing right next to me on the TV here. I mean, it's playoff time, it's football time, hockey's starting up. I mean, it is a great time of year to be a sports fan. And today we are going to be recapping week 5 in the NFL. We're going to give you guys our 5 takeaways from last week. These takeaways are mainly meant to be fantasy football focused, but a lot of it, correlates to the NFL and things like that. So, without further ado, go ahead and give me your first takeaway from last week.
Trevor Lawrence. I mean, you called the breakout game, and he really had one here. I mean, most yards he's had all year by over 100, 371 yards, 2 touchdowns. Did have an interception. Only on 34 pass attempts, was 28 for 34, which is a big thing. 82% completion there. A QBR almost of 120. I mean, just big game there. I mean, much needed. And I also add that in with Brian Thomas Jr. needs some more respect on his name. I get it. Neighbors has been great, but he's also dealing with an injury now. Had a bye week last week. But Brian Thomas, I mean, showed off exactly what I thought he could do. I mean, be one of those guys that is able to beat most secondaries, be able to go stretch the field. I mean, showed off his speed off that like 60 or 75-yard touchdown. I mean, he showed it off all yesterday. Had over 100 yards. I want to say for the second time, maybe his first time in his career, but he's had multiple 80, 90-yard games up to this point. I mean, he showed off who he can be. And Trevor Lawrence, if he's able to stay right there, I get it. They were playing a pretty bad Colts defense, but outside of that, I mean, if they can just do that somewhat on a consistent basis, T-Law be above 250 yards, Brian Thomas exceeding 75 plus yards. I mean, there's a chance Brian Thomas could finish in the top 10 for wide receivers.
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit you were right on him. I thought it was funny in our dynasty league, which you're 5-0. Give you your credit where your credit's due. I had wanted to trade because I think I had 112, you had 201. I wanted to drop to 201 because I wanted Lad. I was trying to get another pick out of you, and I for some reason thought you were going to draft Lad, and then you ended up drafting Brian Thomas because you were super big on him, and he's had a great start to his career. You mentioned Lawrence broke out. I'm gonna go with another breakout. And it's my boy Kirk Cousins. I had said in the Thursday night show that this is the game that Kirk Cousins is gonna break out. So I'm 2 for 2 on breakouts this week. Talk about breaking out. He had a tremendous game against Tampa Bay. Threw for over 500 yards, had 509 yards in the day, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, 0 carries, 0 yards, and had 34 fantasy points on the day, 42 for 58. Now, granted, he did play in overtime, get like 60 passing yards from overtime, but still, a 500-yard passing game and really just broke out into the scene. He was doing the swag and the surfing, after the game as well. Kirko getting going with the crowd. So you talk about the juices flowing and basically the contract that he's got finally paying its due, at least for now. I think Kirk's a safe option week in and week out, and I'm really curious to see kind of what his fantasy value is going to look like. Obviously, he's not going to have the rushing upside at all, but at least he was able to develop a connection with guys like Drake London, Ray McLeod, Kyle Pitts even getting some action. So if you're an Atlanta Falcons wide receiver slash tight end shareholder, you should be pleased there. But all in all, Kirk Cousins waiting for it for a while. It seems to be that he's finally broken out, and I think it's going to be that Kirk Cousins that we saw before the injury last year. All right, your second takeaway.
That Joe Burrow is the best 1-4 quarterback in NFL history. I mean, he's, I believe, first in yards, first in touchdowns, first in QBR, and tied in or first in completions, tied for touchdowns in the NFL right now. Like I said, 1-4 in the first 5 games, 72.3% completion, 1,370 yards, almost 8 yards an attempt, 12 passing touchdowns, only 2 interceptions. Uh, Fantasy points has over 100 at this point. He doesn't give you much rushing upside as a whole, but who needs that when you're to a 6-to-1 touchdown ratio or touchdown to pick ratio, almost 1,400 yards through your first 5 games? I mean, he's doing almost everything right, and they're just losing games. They've lost 2 divisional games already at this point as well. I mean, it's not looking good in the standings for them. Like I said, 1-4, and Joe Burrow has been excellent. Jamar Chase has finally broken out from his first 2 or 3 games of that slow start. 2 weeks ago, I had like 190 yards. This past week, like 100 or 200 yards or something like that. I mean, just both are starting to go off. And Joe Burrow, like I said, I haven't looked at the records overall at all the 1-4 quarterbacks where he was at his best season, but I would bet Joe Burrow is at least top 5, top 3 with this type of season, this type of start that he's had.
My second takeaway is the top tier tight ends. Are they officially back? Obviously, Kelsey's had a good 2 weeks. He obviously had a slow start to the year. Had 15.9 fantasy points, basically 16 fantasy points exactly. Week 4 as well as week 5. He's still looking for his first touchdown on the year, but that's going to come. I mean, he had 9 receptions and 7 receptions the last 2 weeks. That's something I'm looking at here. Andrews, I think he had back-to-back weeks of 0 points, then gets 9 last week, which obviously isn't great, especially for a guy like Mark Andrews, but at least we're trending in the right direction. And Sam Laporta, although he's been quiet, I feel like he was the most consistent going into his bye week. He's back after the bye week, and I think that was big for him. A lot of people forget that Sam Laporta was injured going into the year. I think it was an ankle injury, something definitely with one of his legs. So that's probably one of the reasons why his production has been slowed as well. So if you're buying a guy like Laporta or even Kelsey, I would definitely, or probably not Kelsey, but mainly Laporta or Andrews, maybe you start to kind of buy those guys low right now because of obviously their value. And I think you're going to have a good output moving forward. The biggest thing, though, is Kelsey seems to be back. It was, I think, kind of expected, especially with Rashee Rice going down, but I was still kind of amazed the little production that he had. But all in all, these top tier tight ends that were the top tier tight ends going into this draft seem to be officially back, which is good for tight end fantasy owners around the country. All right, what about your third?
The 49ers may be one of the biggest frauds in the NFL, and it's not even because of Christian McCaffrey's injury. I mean, they're 2-3 right now, and their losses are kind of embarrassing. Their 2 wins. One's against the Patriots. That should be an easy win there. I mean, they just benched Brissett, and I believe Drake May is going to be the starters next week. And their other win was in a pretty good win against the Jets, who have good defense. But it was also Aaron Rodgers' first game back. I wasn't expecting much out of this Jets team with probably a slow start out of Rodgers just because first game back after missing an entire year, tearing your Achilles at that age. I mean, look at someone like Kirk. He had a horrible first game as well. It's just kind of one of those things that I expected. But their losses, Vikings are good, but their
Yeah, they
losses,
are.
they just, it was just a bad loss out of them. They only lost by 6, but it seemed like that team could get the ball moving. Lost against the Rams. This Rams team was missing Puka, but still had Cup. Kyron's still there. Just kind of, I wouldn't say got dominated. Got dominated in the second half, though. That was the game they lost on that walk-off field goal uh, with against the Rams. And this past week against the Cardinals, another loss. Another divisional loss, a big thing one also. Only losing that game, I mean, that was another bad game. You can't lose those divisional games, especially against those 2 teams that are considered probably the bottom 2 teams this past year. I mean, both were top 10 picks. Marvin Harrison there at the Cardinals was the 4th overall pick, I believe, and then I want to say it was like I don't know, like 14th pick or whatever was the Rams. I mean, the Seahawks were expected to be a little bit better with this offense that they have, and the Niners are supposed to be that top team, and they're not looking like that top team. They're 0-2 in their own division. They have a losing record, and the only wins are against teams that they should have definitely won, like the Patriots, like I mentioned, and then first start of the year for Aaron Rodgers.
My third takeaway is Josh Allen too inconsistent to be a top three fantasy quarterback. I mean, he's currently sitting at the fifth best fantasy quarterback right now. He's had really great week 1 and 3, 31 and 30 points. Week 2 and 4 were pretty bad, 9 and 7. And week 5 was right in the middle, about 14.5. The thing that concerned me last week was the fact that he was 9 for 30 passing for 131 yards and 1 touchdown. He has 2 rushing touchdowns on the year, which was in the first week. I feel like his rushing value could be a little bit higher. I mean, yeah, 4 or 6 carries for 40, 50 yards. It's kind of typical Josh Allen, but I'm expecting to see more rushing touchdowns. I believe he had, 15, 16, something like that last year. Only has 2 so far this year. Obviously, if you have Josh Allen, there's no need to panic, but maybe this is where you consider trading him, especially because a lot of quarterbacks, I feel like, are kind of catching up to the running quarterback style where they're finding ways to, pass the football effectively and whatever. And he obviously has not been able to do that, at least at this point of the season. So obviously, he's going to be a top quarterback. I believe, yeah, he was my quarterback one going into this fantasy season. And I still believe he has the potential and probably will be the fantasy one, but he's a little bit too inconsistent. And that's going to come back to bite you in the ass when you're in the playoffs, a win and get in, a move on type of thing. You need guys that are going to be consistent. And for what Josh Allen's value is worth is a time that you maybe go and get a guy that's more consistent and get some higher return in that. But hopefully he'll get his passing figured out. And yeah, a lot of young receivers, especially since Stephon Diggs is no longer there. All right, your fourth takeaway.
Yeah, I'm gonna say right there, Josh Allen. I'm saying it's less of his fault, and he just needs help. Like he
That's
hasn't
true.
been able to push the ball down the field. Keon hasn't really been that super reliable down the field threat like a lot of people thought he could be. He did have the big touchdown, but that was more of a run after the catch. He did make a really good play staying in bounds onto the sideline, but outside of that, I mean, it wasn't really like that big of a play. Like at the grand scheme of things, I mean, Josh Allen started off that game really bad. He was like I think 1 for 9 or something to start off the game. He was like 0 for 5 his first or 0 for 6 his first few attempts, first drive or two. It just wasn't good. But one of the big things I can take away from Josh Allen is that he has no interceptions this year. 8 touchdowns, no interceptions. Last year was an interception problem, and that's why I kind of backed away from him. Last year, he had 18 interceptions. Year before that, 14, 15. I mean, he's been double-digit interceptions up to this point in his career, all except for 1 year, his second year, where he only had 20 touchdowns. Obviously I don't expect him to not throw an entire or any interceptions this entire year, but 8 touchdowns, 0 interception first 5 weeks, winning some games. I mean, I, I can't ask for too much more out of Josh Allen on that part, especially with the weapons that he has. Like I mentioned, Keon hasn't really been that guy. Shakir has been solid this year. Curtis Samuel's been a disappointment in my opinion. I thought he would have a bigger role in this offense. James Cook has been solid. He had that one game against the Dolphins where he took over for 3 touchdowns, but they need a weapon. I mean, Devontae Adams is out there. There's a chance that if Devontae Adams is able to go to this Bills team, this offense could really start moving forward.
So my fourth takeaway is Daniel Jones fantasy relevant? I mean, obviously in week 1 it was a disaster. I watched that game firsthand as a Vikings fan. Wasn't really good, but since then he's had 6 touchdowns to 1 interception. That lone interception coming in week 4 there at home against Dallas. And he's putting up 18 to 19 to even 22 points consistently besides week 1 and that little gap there against Dallas where he didn't have the best of his games. Passing on average for like 230, 250 yards and really isn't showcasing much rushing value. 11 carries for 38 yards. I'd expect maybe 50, 60, 70 with Daniel Jones. And I believe, yeah, he's still looking for his first rushing touchdown on the year. So he's currently sitting at the 14th best quarterback. I'm primarily looking at teams that are in 14 teamers or even 12 teamers as a backup quarterback option. He's basically available, it seems like, in every league, even though he's only rostered in 21.7% of leagues. I think a lot of people are just concerned, and I understand there's concern there, but Daniel Jones is one of those guys that his rushing value makes up for his ability to, or inability, I should say, to complete passes at a high rate. So he's one of those guys that a lot of people should really consider to maybe pick up on their team, particularly if they have, like 7 bench spots or in a deeper league, because he's a guy that could be a dark horse for like your fantasy MVP when you look at the grand scheme of things and trying to work on different areas of your fantasy team. But he's definitely improved. And I guess the biggest question I have is moving forward, can he be fantasy relevant, or is this just kind of like a fluke that he's having some successes that he's had recently? Okay, and then your final takeaway.
Pat Surtain is undoubtedly the best cornerback in the NFL at this point. I know it's him and Sauce going back and forth, but Pat Surtain's been doing this for now 4 years. This past week had a 100-yard pick six against the Raiders. In 5 games, that's 2 interceptions, 4 pass deflections, pick six, like I mentioned. 14 combined tackles. I mean, it's just been great. It has shut down every weapon that the Broncos have faced this year. This Broncos defense is actually decent, and it's because of Pat Surtain. He's been able to lock up everyone. Metcalf, I believe, only had like 2 or 3 receptions for like 20 yards. Pickens, I know, had 1 reception for 16 yards. Just everyone who they played, that he's just taken away that number one option, and you can't ask him to do any more than he did because he's allowed, I want to say, less than 120 yards this year so far through the first 5 weeks. Of everyone he's guarded, everyone he's lined up against, only giving up 120 total yards when he's lined up against your number one option for 80-90% of the game. I mean, you can't do much more than that. I mean, at this point, he is my favorite for Defensive Player of the Year, and this Broncos defense may be one to watch out for.
So my final takeaway is Jalen Tolbert, in my opinion, has established himself as the Cowboys wide receiver two. CD, I believe, is 13th right now in overall wide receivers. He's expected to be, higher, and he just hasn't really been. He's just had kind of an okay year. Definitely disappointing for CD standards. We've obviously seen some frustrations there with CD, but Jalen Tolbert has kind of started to rise to the ranks a little bit. Is currently sitting as a 31st position ranked wide receiver. In weeks 2 and 3, he had 14, 13 points. Last week, 21. And last week, I believe, was the first game with Brandon Cooks on IR. Regardless, Brandon Cooks is on IR, who is expected to be the wide receiver too. I know they obviously have Ferguson there. They seem to kind of dismantled the running game as a whole. So Jalen Tolbert could be one of those guys that you pick up on your fantasy team and have success with. Currently rostered in 28.3% of leagues. I was surprised that didn't rise tremendously after last week. I guess it did, 21.5%, but I was expecting him to be rostered maybe more in half the leagues. So he's definitely out there for people to pick up. Or maybe if you have like low budget guys you want to trade, I think Jalen Tolbert is definitely a safe option, but one that could be sneaky for your fantasy team, especially moving forward here in fantasy. Thank you guys for listening to another episode here on The Truth. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure you follow The Truth on Twitter at The Truth as one to stay up to date with the latest information regarding The Truth, including podcast dates, podcast uploads, and other important information you don't want to miss. Make sure you guys also follow The Truth on Instagram and TikTok at the.tt.truth. Are you looking to find a drink that offers peak hydration, raises your energy levels, speeds up your recovery, and keeps your mind sharp through focus and memory? Look no further than Acid Rainwater. I'm excited to partner with Bloodline Sports and Acid Rainwater, which focuses on peak hydration and productivity, while also maintaining ecosystem-friendly product. Use code HESSON15, that's HESSON15 for 15% off every purchase. As always, I'm your host, one you love the most, Niall Hesson, joined once again by AJ Ponciano. Take care and good night.